She fell to her knees in the hospital corridor, clutching his sleeve with trembling hand. "Please, save my mom." He looked down, froze, and recognized the girl he'd lost. Welcome, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The air inside the cramped apartment was damp with the smell of boiled rice and medicine. Isabella pressed the back of her hand to her mother's forehead, trying to gauge if the fever had worsened. The flickering bulb above them buzzed like a mosquito, throwing shadows against the peeling wallpaper. Her mother coughed, the sound raw and deep, shaking her frail body. Isabella's chest tightened. She hated the helplessness that came every time her mother coughed like that, as though each breath might be her last. "Mom, just try to rest," Isabella whispered, smoothing her mother's damp hair back from her face. Her mother's lips twitched into a weak smile. "I'm fine, darling, just tired." Isabella bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. She wasn't fine. The medicine wasn't working anymore, and every day Isabella feared that time was running out. Her gaze drifted to the kitchen counter, where a pile of unopened envelopes sat like silent threats. Rent overdue. Utilities overdue. And the hospital bill, the one she couldn't even bring herself to open. She was 22 years old, but life had forced her to grow old before her time. Every morning she worked double shifts at the diner, every evening she came home to care for her mother. Dreams of college, of becoming a writer, were nothing but faded scraps in a notebook buried in her dresser. She squeezed her mother's hand. "I won't lose you. I can't." Across town, in a glass-walled penthouse perched above the skyline, Adrian Blackwood adjusted his cufflinks. His reflection in the mirror was as polished as the marble floors around him. Dark hair immaculately combed, suit tailored to perfection, ice-cold and calculating. To the world, he was the brilliant billionaire doctor, a man who had saved countless lives and built an empire of private hospitals. But in the silence of his apartment, Adrian felt nothing but the weight of loneliness. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, though it was barely past noon, letting the amber liquid burn down his throat. Another night of meaningless galas, handshakes, and hollow conversations awaited him. The city revered him, envied him, even feared him. But no one truly knew him. Not anymore. His phone buzzed on the counter. A message from the hospital, a critical case waiting. He straightened his tie, the flicker of annoyance quickly masked by routine. Work was his refuge, the one place where control silenced the ghosts of his past. That night, Isabella stood in the corner of the hospital lobby, clutching her mother's frail hand as nurses wheeled her in. The fluorescent lights were harsh, the smell of antiseptic sharp enough to sting her nose. Fear clawed at her chest. "Please," she begged the nurse at the desk, her voice trembling. "She can't breathe properly. She needs help now." The nurse gave her a strained look. "Fill out these forms, and we'll—" "I don't have time for forms." Isabella snapped, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, she's all I have." Her mother coughed again, collapsing against the wheelchair. Isabella's panic swelled. The room tilted, the chatter of voices fading under the pounding of her heart. She dropped to her knees beside her mother, whispering prayers under her breath. It was then that the lobby doors slid open, and footsteps echoed across the marble. A commanding presence filled the room. Heads turned. Dr. Adrian Blackwood had arrived. Isabella didn't notice the hush that fell over the staff, or the way the man's gaze swept the room with quiet authority. She only saw her mother's paling face. She scrambled up, her hands shaking, and rushed forward, colliding with him. She clutched his sleeve, her voice breaking. "Please, please save my mom. I don't care what it costs. She's all I have." Adrian froze. The girl's desperate eyes bore into him, eyes he hadn't seen in years but could never forget. His chest tightened, his world crashing inward. He'd thought he buried this part of his life forever. Yet here she was, Isabella. And in that instant, everything he thought he knew unraveled. If you were in Isabella's place, with no money, no options, and your loved one's life slipping away, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. For a moment, the hospital seemed to stop breathing. Adrian stared down at the young woman clutching his sleeve, her voice shaking with desperation. Her fingers dug into his jacket like claws clinging to the last shred of hope. He should have spoken, should have called for the nurses, but instead his mind spun backward in time, to a life he had locked away. Those eyes wide, fierce, pleading, he knew them too well. "Doctor," a nurse whispered, breaking the silence. "Should we take over?" Adrian's jaw clenched. He forced himself back into the present, slipping into the mask he wore so well. With a slow exhale, he crouched down to Isabella's level. "What's your mother's name?" he asked, his voice low, professional, steady, though inside his chest thundered. Isabella blinked at him, startled by the calm in his tone. "Maria. Maria Torres. Please, she can't breathe properly. She needs help now." Adrian nodded once, rising. His voice snapped with authority. "Get a gurney, oxygen, and prep the ER. Now." The nurses scrambled into motion. Isabella followed as they wheeled her mother away, her heart hammering. Relief surged that he hadn't dismissed her, but dread lingered. She had seen the flicker in his eyes when he looked at her, like he knew something she didn't. Inside the ER, monitors beeped frantically as Maria's chest rose and fell in shallow gasps. Adrian leaned over her, barking orders with practiced precision. 4-line. Full panel labs. Chest X-ray, stat. Isabella stood just outside the curtain, arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming silently down her face. The sterile scent of antiseptic stung her nose. Every second felt like an hour. "Will she be okay?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. Adrian glanced at her. For a moment, the mask slipped. He saw not just a patient's daughter, but her. The girl who once laughed in sunlit fields, who once trusted him. His throat tightened. "She's critical," he said softly. "But I'll do everything I can." Isabella nodded, clutching her hands together. She didn't know why, but something in his voice made her believe him. Hours passed in a blur of wires, machines, and whispered prayers. When at last Adrian emerged from behind the curtain, his face was drawn, but his eyes met Isabella's with quiet certainty. "She's stable for now," he said. "But she'll need continued care. We're not out of danger." Relief crashed over Isabella like a wave. Her knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands as sobs escaped her. Thank you." Adrian watched her, torn between duty and memory. Every tear that slid down her cheeks was a reminder of what he had lost, of the promises he had broken years ago. Later, when the machines hummed softly and Maria rested peacefully, Adrian found himself lingering near the doorway of the room. Isabella sat by her mother's bedside, holding her hand, whispering in Spanish words of love, promises of tomorrow. It pierced him. The way she clung to hope. The way she hadn't noticed him watching. Finally, she turned, eyes red but determined. "Doctor. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. I don't have much, but I'll work, I'll do anything. Just, don't give up on her." Adrian's chest tightened. He wanted to say her name, wanted to confess that she didn't need to explain herself, that he knew her better than she realized. But instead he swallowed the truth. "You don't need to repay me," he said quietly. "Focus on your mother." The look in her eyes almost undid him. Gratitude, fear, and something unspoken, trust. That night, after rounds, Adrian retreated to his office, but restlessness gnawed at him. He poured whiskey into a glass, staring out at the city lights. He had seen thousands of patients, but never had one left him shaken like this. Isabella Torres. The name reverberated in his chest. He whispered it like a confession. She didn't recognize him yet, but when she did, would she hate him for the past he had tried so hard to erase? Back in the patient's room, Isabella held her mother's hand and whispered prayers. She thought of the doctor, the way his eyes had softened when he spoke to her, the way his presence steadied the chaos. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope. And yet, there was something about him she couldn't place, a familiarity she didn't understand. She brushed it off, leaning close to her mother. "You'll be okay, Mama. We'll get through this. I promise." Do you believe people from our past come back into our lives for a reason? Or is it all just coincidence? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The hum of machines filled Maria's hospital room, steady and rhythmic, a fragile reminder that she was still alive. Isabella sat slumped in the chair beside her mother's bed, exhaustion dragging at her body. She hadn't slept in almost 2 days. Every time her eyelids fell shut, she jolted awake in fear that the beeping would stop. Her gaze flicked toward the doorway. He was there again. The doctor. Adrian. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid, eyes scanning the monitors. He barely acknowledged her presence, yet she felt the weight of it as though he carried more than the charts in his hands. Isabella cleared her throat. "You don't have to keep coming back, you know. I'm sure there are patients who matter more." Adrian's head snapped toward her. "Every patient matters," he said flatly, almost too quickly. The silence stretched. Isabella looked down, ashamed of the bitterness in her tone. "Sorry. I know we can't afford much, and I don't want you wasting your time on us." For a flicker of a moment, something raw flashed in his eyes, anger, almost pain. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He straightened. "Your mother's condition is serious. She'll get the same care as anyone else." The same care. The word stung. She wanted to believe him, but the world had taught her otherwise. People with money lived, people like her begged. Later that evening, Isabella stepped into the hospital corridor, stretching her aching legs. The vending machine whirred as she pressed coins into it, hoping for stale coffee to keep her awake. She didn't hear the footsteps until he spoke behind her. "You need rest," Adrian said. His tone was soft, almost human this time. Isabella turned, clutching the paper cup. "Rest?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Rest doesn't pay the bills. Rest doesn't save my mom." Adrian's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her he understood more than she realized, but his walls went up again. Vulnerability was dangerous. So instead, he gave her the version of himself the world knew, cold, composed, untouchable. "Exhaustion won't help her either," he said. "You'll collapse if you keep this up." Her eyes flared. "What choice do I have? If I don't fight for her, who will?" Her voice cracked, and for a moment, Adrian almost stepped closer. Almost reached for her hand. But then he stopped, retreating into the safety of distance. That night, in his office, Adrian sat at his desk staring at Isabella's file. The inked words blurred as memories rose unbidden. The laughter of children. The way the sunlight used to fall across a girl's hair. A promise he hadn't kept. He slammed the file shut, anger clawing at him. He couldn't let himself go there. Not now. Not when the past was a wound that had never healed. "Keep it professional," he muttered under his breath. "She doesn't need your ghosts." Back in the hospital room, Isabella pressed her forehead against her mother's frail hand. "I don't trust him, Mama," she whispered. "There's something about him, like he knows me." "But that's impossible, right?" Her mother stirred faintly but didn't wake. Isabella sighed. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe it was just her exhaustion playing tricks on her. Still, a question gnawed at her: why does he look at me like that? The next morning, Adrian made his rounds. When he entered Maria's room, Isabella stood quickly, defensive as if she needed to shield her mother. "She's not some charity case," Isabella blurted out, her voice sharp. "I'll find a way to pay, I promise. Just don't pity us." Adrian stopped in his tracks. His eyes darkened, a storm gathering. "Do you think this is about pity?" His voice was low, almost dangerous. Isabella faltered, suddenly unsure. He took a step closer, his tone clipped but intense. "If I wanted pity, I wouldn't be here at midnight checking her vitals myself. I don't do pity, Miss Torres. I do medicine." The way he said her name sent a chill through her. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding. For the rest of the day, she avoided him, keeping her focus on her mother. But she couldn't stop thinking about the way he said her name, as though it carried more weight than she could understand. And Adrian? He buried himself in rounds, trying to silence the voice in his head that whispered her name over and over again. Isabella. Isabella. Both of them trapped in the same storm, both too afraid to face what connected them. Do you think Isabella should trust the doctor's intentions, or is she right to keep her guard up? Comment your thoughts, I'd love to know which side you're on. The rain outside pounded against the hospital windows like a relentless drumbeat. The city streets were flooding, traffic at a standstill. Inside, the night shift whispered of power outages spreading across the district. Isabella sat at her mother's bedside, her nerves taut as wires. Maria stirred, coughing weakly. Isabella squeezed her hand. I'm here, Mama. Don't worry. Just then, the lights flickered, dimmed, and went out. For a heartbeat, the room was swallowed in darkness until the emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in a cold, red glow. A nurse rushed in. Miss Torres, the storm knocked out half the grid. We're on backup power. The doctor will be here to check on her. Isabella's stomach twisted. Of course it would be him. Moments later, Adrian appeared in the doorway, flashlight in hand, his coat damp from the storm. His presence filled the room as surely as the crimson light. Backup generators will hold, but we need to stay alert, he said, moving toward the machines by Maria's bed. His voice was steady, controlled. Isabella crossed her arms. You mean we need to stay alert? You're not sending me away. Adrian glanced at her, a flicker of amusement almost tugging at his mouth. You'd fight me if I tried, wouldn't you? Her chin lifted stubbornly. She's my mother. I'm not leaving. For the first time, his eyes softened. Good. Then we watch over her together. Hours dragged on. The storm raged, rain lashing against the windows, thunder shaking the building. Adrian adjusted equipment, checked vitals, and scribbled notes while Isabella sat close to her mother, whispering reassurances. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the beeping of monitors. At last, Isabella broke it. You don't have to babysit us all night, she muttered, eyes fixed on her mother. Don't you have bigger responsibilities? Adrian looked at her, his face shadowed in the red glow. This is my responsibility. The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. Isabella frowned, confused by the depth in his tone. When a sudden surge made the machines flicker, Isabella gasped, reaching for her mother. What's happening? Adrian moved swiftly, steadying the equipment. Power fluctuation. She's stable. Don't panic. But her hands shook. Her breaths came too fast. Seeing her like that, so fragile, so terrified, something inside him cracked. Breathe with me, Adrian said, kneeling beside her. His voice was softer now, almost a whisper. In. Out. Like this. She hesitated, but then mirrored his breaths, her chest rising and falling until the trembling eased. For the first time, their eyes really met. And in that moment, Isabella felt it, the strange, unshakable familiarity she couldn't explain. The storm pressed on. Midnight turned to 2 a.m. Adrian set his jacket over the back of her chair, noticing how she shivered. You'll freeze, Isabella protested. I'll survive, he said simply. She studied him for a long moment, curiosity tugging at her. For all his arrogance, for all his walls, there was something in the way he hovered near her mother's bedside, in the way he stayed when he didn't have to. Something that didn't match the billionaire doctor everyone whispered about. Finally, she asked the question that had been gnawing at her. Why are you doing this? Really? Adrian froze, his jaw tightening. He could have lied, told her it was duty, or policy. But his voice betrayed a trace of something else. Because I can't walk away from this. Her heart thudded. The way he said it, the weight in his eyes, made her feel as though he wasn't just talking about her mother. At dawn, the storm began to ease, the first rays of light piercing through the clouds. Maria was still stable, breathing softly under the hum of machines. Isabella exhaled a long, tired breath. She turned to find Adrian still there, sitting in the corner, exhaustion etched into his features. His tie was undone, his sleeves rolled, his head tilted back against the wall. For the first time, he didn't look like a billionaire doctor untouchable by the world. He looked human. And Isabella realized, with a jolt she didn't want to admit, that she wanted to know who he really was. The storm had passed, but the air inside the hospital still felt heavy, charged with everything unspoken. Isabella hadn't left her mother's bedside in days, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Yet she couldn't ignore the presence that lingered, the doctor who refused to disappear. Adrian. He had become a constant, checking vitals, adjusting medicine, always hovering just close enough that she felt his watchful gaze. It was comforting and unsettling all at once. On the third morning, Isabella slipped out into the hallway to stretch her legs. Her steps carried her farther than she intended, down a quieter wing of the hospital. She slowed when she passed a glass case filled with plaques, photographs, and articles. The headline caught her eye. Philanthropist Dr. Adrian Blackwood expands network of private hospitals. A photograph showed him shaking hands with the mayor, his smile sharp and composed. But it was the smaller frame beneath that stopped Isabella cold. A charity gala, years ago. Her mother, younger, healthier, stood in the background of the photo, working as a server. Her chest tightened. "What are you doing here?" The voice behind her startled her. She turned to find Adrian watching, his expression unreadable. "I was just looking," Isabella stammered, gesturing toward the display. "I didn't realize you," she stopped, swallowing hard. "You've been doing this for a long time." Adrian's gaze lingered on the photograph, then shifted back to her. "Longer than you think." Something in his tone made her stomach twist. Later, when she returned to her mother's room, Isabella found an old locket on the bedside table. Her mother must have knocked it out of her bag in her sleep. Isabella picked it up, her thumb brushing over the tarnished surface before she opened it. Inside was a faded photo of her parents, smiling, young, full of life. But tucked behind it was something else, another picture. Isabella squinted at the unfamiliar face of a teenage boy standing beside her father. Her brow furrowed. "Who?" "Isabella." She jumped, the locket slipping from her fingers. Adrian stood in the doorway, his gaze fixed on the tiny photograph. His face had gone pale. "You know him," Isabella said slowly, her pulse quickening. Adrian stepped closer, his voice low, almost hoarse. "That's me." The world seemed to tilt. Isabella's heart slammed against her ribs. She looked from the photo to the man before her. The jawline, the eyes a younger, softer, but unmistakable. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible." Adrian's hand curled into a fist at his side. "It's not." The silence in the room grew thick. Isabella's mind raced, memories stirring fragments of laughter, faint echoes of a boy who used to visit when she was very small. A boy her father once called his brightest protégé. "You knew my father," she breathed. Adrian's throat worked, but no words came. Her voice rose, trembling with anger and disbelief. "All this time, you knew us? You knew me?" His eyes met hers, filled with guilt he couldn't hide. "Yes." Her knees nearly gave out. She sank into the chair beside her mother, clutching the locket like a lifeline. The betrayal burned hot in her chest. "Why didn't you say anything?" Adrian moved closer, then stopped, torn between confession and restraint. "Because the past is complicated. I left. I shouldn't have, but I did. And I've regretted it every day since." Isabella's hands shook. "You were like family. And then you disappeared. Do you know what that did to us? To my mom? To me?" His jaw tightened, shame flickering across his features. "I know. And I can't undo it." The room fell into silence, broken only by the steady beep of Maria's monitor. Isabella turned away, her throat tight. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, But her mother's frail figure lay between them, a reminder of what mattered most. Just save her, Isabella whispered fiercely, tears blurring her vision. That's all I care about. Whatever you were in the past, it doesn't matter now. But as the words left her lips, her chest ached with the lie. It did matter. It mattered more than she wanted to admit. Adrian stood in the doorway long after she stopped speaking. His gaze lingered on her bowed head, on the strength and pain woven into her. She remembers more than she thinks, he realized. And when she remembers everything, will she ever forgive me? The locket still rested in Isabella's palm long after Adrian had left the room. Her thumb traced the worn metal, her chest heavy with questions. Memories tugged at the edges of her mind, faint echoes of laughter, the faint scent of her father's cologne, and a boy who used to sit cross-legged on the floor teaching her how to fold paper cranes. Adrian. The name now carried both comfort and betrayal. She closed her fist around the locket. Why now, she whispered to herself. Why come back into our lives now? That night, the hospital hallways were quiet. The storm had passed, but the echoes of its chaos lingered in the humming generators and the smell of damp concrete. Isabella slipped out for fresh air, wrapping her sweater tightly around herself as she stepped into the small courtyard. She froze when she saw him sitting on the bench beneath the flickering lamplight. Adrian, his tie undone, shoulders hunched, hands clasped between his knees. For once, he didn't look like a billionaire or a doctor. He looked lost. She almost turned back, but his voice reached her. You shouldn't be out in the cold. Her jaw tightened. Neither should you. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Fair enough. She hesitated, then sat at the far end of the bench. Silence stretched between them, thick with all the things neither dared to say. Finally, Isabella broke it. You could have told me. Adrian's jaw clenched. I know. Why didn't you? Her voice cracked, the rawness she tried to hide spilling through. Do you know what it was like? Waiting for someone who never came back? Watching my mom cry because she thought you'd forgotten us? He turned toward her, pain etched across his features. I didn't forget. Not for a single day. Her breath caught. The sincerity in his voice disarmed her, leaving her vulnerable. Then why? Adrian looked down at his hands. Because I was young. Because I was scared. Because your father and we had a falling out, and I thought leaving was the only way to become the man I wanted to be. But I lost more than I gained. His eyes lifted to hers, raw and unguarded. I lost you. The words lingered in the night air. Isabella's heart thudded painfully. She should have been furious. She wanted to be furious. But instead, something inside her cracked, not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. The boy she once adored wasn't gone. He was sitting right here, broken in ways she hadn't imagined. You can't just say things like that, she whispered, voice trembling. Why not? He asked softly. It's the truth. Her throat tightened. She blinked back tears, clutching the locket. I don't know if I can trust you. Adrian leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Then let me earn it. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the night wrapping around them. Isabella felt the weight on her chest ease ever so slightly. She wasn't ready to forgive, but she couldn't deny the strange safety of his presence. Finally, she let out a shaky laugh. Do you still know how to fold paper cranes? Adrian's brows lifted in surprise. Then, slowly, the corners of his mouth tugged upward, the faintest smile. I never forgot. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a scrap of paper, a page from his notes, and began folding with precise, practiced hands. Isabella watched as the sharp lines took shape, her chest tightening with nostalgia. When he placed the finished crane in her hand, their fingers brushed, sending a spark through her veins. She looked at the delicate folds, tears blurring her vision. Some things don't change, he said quietly. Back in the room, Maria stirred. Isabella rushed to her side, Adrian following. Maria's eyelids fluttered open, her weak smile softening the tension. You're still here, Maria whispered, her gaze drifting toward Adrian. After all these years. Adrian's throat tightened. He reached for her hand gently. I should never have left. Maria squeezed weakly, her eyes glistening. Then don't leave again. The words hit Isabella like a thunderclap. She turned to Adrian, searching his face. He didn't look away. That night, Isabella lay in the chair by her mother's bed, clutching the paper crane. Her emotions were a storm: anger, longing, fear, and something she didn't dare name. For the first time in years, she felt the faint flicker of something she thought she'd buried with her childhood. Hope. And though she tried to fight it, a single thought echoed in her heart: maybe he really has come back for a reason. The paper crane still sat on the nightstand by Maria's bed the next evening, a fragile symbol of the bond Isabella and Adrian had begun to rebuild. Isabella couldn't stop glancing at it. Every time her eyes landed on the delicate folds, warmth bloomed in her chest, and with it, fear. She didn't want to trust him. Not yet. Not when trust had been broken once before. But somehow, against her better judgment, she was beginning to. That was when the storm broke again. Not in the skies, but in her heart. It started with voices in the corridor. Isabella had gone to fetch water from the vending machine when she froze at the sound of Adrian's deep tone. He was speaking with another doctor, his voice lowered, but she caught enough to make her stomach drop. She doesn't have insurance. Her bills are already over the limit, the other doctor muttered. Adrian's response was clipped. Then move her on to the charity ledger. Quietly. No headlines. Isabella's heart pounded. Charity. She pressed her back against the wall, her chest tightening. So that's what this was? That's why he stayed, why he hovered. Because he pitied her. Because she was a project to ease his guilt. Her hands shook as she clutched the cup of water. The crane. The late-night conversation. His words about trust. It all felt like a lie. When Adrian returned to Maria's room later, Isabella's eyes were burning with unshed tears. She rose from her chair, her voice sharp enough to cut through the sterile air. Tell me the truth, she demanded. Adrian froze. About what? About why you're really here. About why you're helping us. His brows furrowed. I told you. No, she shook her head fiercely, the locket glinting at her throat. I heard you. Out there. Talking about me. About putting us on some charity list. Like we're nothing but your pity project. Adrian's chest tightened. Isabella, it's not like that. Then what is it like? Her voice cracked, anger and grief spilling together. Because it feels like I'm just another case for you to fix so you can feel better about yourself. The words sliced through him. He stepped closer, desperation in his eyes. That's not true. I'm here because. Because you feel guilty, she spat. Because you left us and now you think throwing money and medical care at us makes it okay? Her voice shook, but the fire in her eyes burned steady. You don't get to disappear for years, waltz back in, and expect me to believe you care. Adrian's hands curled into fists. For once, he couldn't find the right words. He wanted to shout that he did care, that he had never stopped. He wanted to confess the nights he stayed awake thinking of her, the guilt that had hollowed him out for years. But pride and fear held him back. You don't understand, he said finally, his voice low. Then help me understand, Isabella shot back, her chest heaving. His silence was answer enough. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She shook her head, her voice breaking. You haven't changed. You're still the boy who left when things got hard. She brushed past him, her shoulders striking his as she fled the room. Adrian remained rooted to the floor, his chest aching. He had faced death in the operating room without flinching, stared down billion-dollar deals without blinking, but a single look of betrayal from Isabella Torres shattered him. He sank into the chair she had vacated, his head in his hands. The paper crane caught his eye on the nightstand, its fragile wings seeming to mock him. You fool, he thought bitterly. You thought you could fix this. You thought she could forgive you. But maybe you don't deserve it. Isabella rushed down the corridor, her vision blurred with tears. She didn't stop until she reached the stairwell, where she sank onto the cold steps and pressed her face into her hands. Memories of the bench, of the paper crane, of his voice whispering "let me earn it" echoed in her ears. She wanted to believe those moments had been real. But reality screamed louder. He had left once before, and he would leave again. Her mother was all that mattered. Not him. Not his regrets. Not the ache in her chest every time she looked at him. She swore to herself then, "I won't let him break me twice." That night, for the first time since her mother had been admitted, Isabella asked a nurse to sit with her while she left the hospital. She stepped into the cool night air, the city lights blurred through her tears. Adrian remained in the shadows of his office window above, watching her go. Both of them alone. Both of them aching. Both wondering if they had just destroyed the only chance they'd ever have to heal. The hospital hallway was quiet, the world seemingly holding its breath. Isabella stood frozen, her hand still clutching the doorframe of her mother's room. Down the corridor, Adrian approached slowly, the folded paper crane balanced carefully in his palm. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the silence between them was louder than any storm. Isabella's throat tightened. She wanted to run from the ache, the anger, the pull that had haunted her since the night he reappeared. But her mother's words whispered inside her heart, "Love doesn't come when it's easy. It comes when it's hardest." Adrian stopped a few feet away, his expression raw, unguarded. He held out the crane. "This was supposed to be for you," he said quietly, his voice trembling despite his effort to steady it. "But I don't know if you'll even want it anymore." Her gaze dropped to the crane. The delicate folds mirrored the one she already carried in her pocket, the one she had almost thrown away. Her fingers itched to take it, but fear still clung to her like chains. "Why?" she whispered. "Why can't you just let us go?" Adrian's jaw clenched. He took a shaky breath. "Because I already let you go once. And it ruined me. I thought leaving would make me stronger, that I needed to prove something to myself. But all it did was teach me how empty life is without you, without your family." His voice cracked, his eyes glistening. "I can't change the past, Isabella. But I can promise you this, I will not walk away again. Not from you. Not from your mother. Not from the chance to make things right." Her chest ached, every wall she'd built trembling under the weight of his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it scared her. "But what if you fail me again?" she asked, her voice breaking. Adrian stepped closer, the crane still extended between them. "Then I'll get back up and fight for you again. And again. And again. Because for the first time in my life, I know exactly who is worth everything." Isabella's hand trembled as she reached out. She hovered, hesitating, her eyes locked on his. Then, slowly, she took the crane from his palm. Her fingers brushed his, and the jolt of warmth that shot through her was undeniable. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," she whispered. Adrian's lips curved into the faintest, bittersweet smile. "Then don't. Just, let me stay until you can." At that moment, Maria's weak voice drifted from the room behind them. "Isabella?" Both turned quickly, rushing to her side. Maria's eyes fluttered open, her smile soft despite her exhaustion. "I heard voices. Did you two finally stop being stubborn?" Isabella flushed, swiping at her cheeks. "Mama!" Maria reached for Adrian's hand with surprising strength. "Don't leave her again." Adrian bent, pressing her fragile hand to his lips. "Never," he whispered. The days that followed carried a new rhythm. Maria's condition stabilized under Adrian's relentless care, and the hospital staff whispered about how the billionaire doctor seemed to live on the ward now. But for Isabella, the changes were quieter, subtler. She found herself meeting Adrian in the courtyard at night, sharing coffee from the vending machine, speaking in low tones that carried fragments of their past and glimpses of a future neither dared to fully imagine yet. They laughed, sometimes real, unguarded laughter that made her chest ache with relief. Other times, they sat in silence, the unspoken heavy but no longer unbearable. The wounds hadn't vanished. But for the first time, Isabella believed healing was possible. One evening, as the city lights glowed beyond the hospital windows, Adrian placed something on the nightstand beside Isabella's chair. It was another paper crane, but this time, it wasn't plain. The folds were lined with words, his handwriting filling the paper from edge to edge. She looked up at him, confused. "What is this?" "Everything I should have said years ago," he replied softly. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the raw confessions etched across the page, his regrets, his apologies, his longing, his promise to never disappear again. By the time she finished reading, tears blurred her vision. "Adrian." He knelt beside her, his gaze steady, vulnerable. "I can't undo the past. But I can build a future. If you'll let me." Her heart pounded. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, with a trembling smile, Isabella whispered, "Then prove it. Stay." Adrian exhaled shakily, relief flooding his face as though he'd been holding his breath for years. "I will." Weeks later, Maria was well enough to return home. On discharge day, Isabella helped her mother into a wheelchair, but when she looked up, Adrian was already there, ready to push it himself. Isabella smiled faintly. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. Maria chuckled weakly, glancing between them. "You see? Love at last." Isabella blushed, but her hand found Adrian's as they wheeled Maria out into the sunlight. As they stepped into the bright morning, Isabella glanced at Adrian, her voice quiet but steady. "You know, the day this started, I begged you to save my mom." Adrian's eyes softened. "And I'll keep saving her. For as long as she needs me." She shook her head, tears glimmering but this time full of hope. "You already saved me too." Their fingers intertwined, the past still present, but no longer their prison. It was their foundation. Dear viewers, sometimes life often forces us to choose between pride and vulnerability, fear and love. If you were Isabella, would you risk being hurt again, or would you take the leap toward unexpected love? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way through. If it touched you, I know you'll enjoy the next one even more. It's full of twists you won't see coming. Don't miss out. Please click the subscribe button and like this video, so you'll be informed for more stories. Have a great day.